Hello and welcome to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting. I'm Phil.emonson, and in this podcast series we unpick some of the complexities, challenges and opportunities on the topic of climate resilience with some inspirational thought leaders. Now our theme for today's episode is planning and development, and we'll explore how we can create sustainable and resilient places, ones that we all want to live, work and play in. And to have that conversation, I'm pleased to be joined by two amazing guests. JBA's Iain Armstrong and planning expert Bart Milburn. So a very warm welcome to you both. And perhaps you'd like to start by introducing yourselves. Iain, over to you.
Yeah, hi Phil. Yeah, I'm Iain Armstrong. I'm principal planning consultant at JBA Consulting. I've been in this role for 3 years now. And prior to that, I worked over 20 years in local government as a town planner in development management, so determining planning applications and developing planning policies and local plans as well. And I'm a chartered town planner.
Fantastic. It's great to have you. And Bart, introduction from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phil. Two thank yous first. First of all, thank you for inviting me to the JBA podcast, and secondly, for describing me as a planning expert. That's very welcome. My background is also 25 years at local authority, but in the last year, I've set up my own planning consultancy, dealing with all sorts of applications, everything across the whole breadth of what planning is, from large renewable sites, housing, to much smaller minor schemes, listed buildings, like I say, the whole gambit. And yeah, I'm very, very pleased to be here today and to be part of this discussion.
Fantastic. Great. Well, look, let's kick off. Let's get going. So I think it's fair to say that in the planning and development context, there is some change at the moment. In that landscape in terms of policy and legislation. I think there's been some reforms as well. And I think that's probably a useful place to start, set the context for the discussion. Maybe Iain, perhaps if you could perhaps kick us off with a description of some of those changes and the reforms that we've seen.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, there's been a lot recently following the change of government. So there's been a new national planning policy framework issued, so NPPF for short, which was issued in December, just gone. That's had some quite big changes in terms of headlines about sort of planning for greater housing numbers. We're in a housing crisis and trying to increase the number of homes that we deliver each year. The potential game changer is this new definition of grey belt, which is land in the green belt, which is either previously developed land or doesn't make a great purpose contribution to the green belt purposes. That I think has got a potential to deliver a lot more housing in sustainable locations where accessible from public transport, etc. And there's other further changes in the pipeline as well with the new planning and infrastructure bill, which is to come out in the coming weeks. Again, that's full of changes in terms of how planning committees work, things like that. So yeah, I think the only constant in planning is that there is change, really.
Bart, maybe if you want to come in there, any evolutions that you've seen over recent years or more recent timeframes?
Yeah, well, I think as Iain says, there's never an opportunity to stop and sort of think in planning, because there is constant change, evolution, and things that both local authority and consultancies need to look out for. I think the biggest change for me is just the headline that planners are getting again. And I think there is a bit of planner bashing, but it's actually quite good to hear from this side of the fence I'm now on, being a consultant. But what's come out, and I think it was in Rachel Reeves's keynote speech about a week or two ago, where she talked about how surprised she was how long planning takes. And I think that's something we can all relate to. Whenever anybody engages with planning, it does seem to take an enormous amount of time. And I think the government's broad ambition to try and speed planning up and it not to be seen as a hurdle probably is really welcome. And I'm sure it's welcomed by both sides, both public and private sector, and that third sort of tier as well. I think for local authority, that probably means more funding. It means much larger authorities as well. I think the days of district authorities and smaller authorities are probably numbered. There was a previous push by the Conservative government to bring larger authorities, unitary authorities, into being, and the current government's echoing that as well. And I think there are some massive strengths in coming from decision making in unitary authorities. I've worked as both head of planning in a district authority, which has challenges because of just the size and scale we are. But then, secondly, I've worked in unitary authorities where actually you can do some amazing things because you've got so much resource and staffing as well, so just far stronger in unitary authorities. But on the ground, what does it mean for, I suppose, consultants? Well, BNG's come in, the complexities of that, that's probably delaying things, though I think as a planner, I kind of believe in BNG, and I think it is probably a good thing, though it needs to be streamlined radically, absolutely radically. I think on bigger schemes, it probably works very well. For smaller single house and things, it's just astronomically expensive and prohibitive to making quick decisions. Flood risks under review, I think that's hugely welcomed. I think the flood risk maps that we've been using for years are, probably not as accurate as they could be. And I think the review of that, which should be coming out in sort of springtime, may release a huge amount of land, may not release a huge amount of land, but may release a significant amount of land for future growth in good places as well, which is obviously welcomed. But as Iain's touched on, it's this grey belt, the discussion about grey belt, and appeal decisions are starting to come through now. And I think there's a bit of consistency in terms of some of the local authority and inspectors' decision making around that. And again, very welcomed and just provides a little bit more opportunity for growth, primarily housing. But I think also some of the other changes I've noticed are which are coming across my desk, and I've noticed in sort of the last sort of 24 months when I was head of planning in North Yorkshire. There's a lot more sort of slightly unusual schemes coming forward, like data centres, which need a huge amount of land, a lot more solar schemes. There's some different things happening, whereas during COVID, it was all about large logistics buildings on key strategic routes and things that sort of dropped like a stone, and we've got a new sort of area. So it's really, as well as no change in planning, it's also incredibly interesting. There's loads of opportunities for learning. And I think the importance of CPD to get your head around this is fascinating. But I think broadly the discussions about what the government's saying about we need to grow, well, planning is absolutely fundamental to that, and good planning is fundamental. I recently met our local MP, I'm not going to name drop him, about a scheme, and it was really good to talk to him. He was well briefed and understood planning to a point. And what he talked about was, and it was really good to hear, what he talked about was, yes, we're going to build a lot of housing, we're going to grow, but what they are determined, or he said he was determined about, he's a local guy, as well as being our MP, that the legacy, he was proud of the legacy. He wouldn't have to avoid a scheme that's been approved or come forward under this administration. He'd actually be proud to say, well, we've delivered this, we've facilitated that through speeding up processes, resourcing local authorities, and we've actually delivered the affordable housing with the the golden rules, about 15% above if Greenbelt release has been made. We've improved ecology, we've improved public open space for people, we've improved accessibility. So that's really good to hear. But look, let's see, because often the proof's in the pudding. And we all probably have schemes. Iain, you and I probably have a couple of things in Gateshead from our days dealing with pretty major infrastructure and schemes down along the quayside, which we're incredibly proud of. But there's the odd one or two which have sort of snuck in, and you think that could have been a little bit better. And I think that's the main thing. So growth, resources, but that's coupled with the balance of increased legislation and hoops to jump through. And I haven't even talked about the simple things about getting the planning application valid and the delays in local authorities, because I'm not here to kick local authorities, but a Northeast authority who's desperate for housing and growth took 6 weeks to validate an application. That to me is something that really should be fundamentally addressed. Because it's just dead time. It's just flat time for an application. And what I don't want to
actually
say is,
sorry, carry on.
yeah, no, go. Well, all I was
Well,
going to say is I'm trying to remember a quote which I heard, that planning is the first hurdle to cross for excellent development. And I think it shouldn't be. I think it should be that development management. We should assist it and help in the journey of delivering really good development. Over to you, Phil.
Well, no, I think that's been a really great scene setting actually from you, Bart and Iain there. It's great to reference things like biodiversity net gain and the new National Flood Risk Assessment NAFA 2, which is coming in the spring, and the legislative context. What you were alluding to there, Bart, in terms of the timeframes and some of the challenges, relate, I suppose, to where this conversation can go next, which is in other podcasts, we've explored how we can engage the whole of society in our work to build a more climate resilient nation. And I suppose the same question applies here in the context of planning. Now, I would imagine that typically those people who engage in the planning process or with local planning applications are those who have a degree of agency or interest. Be that they've got time. They might have a particular, professional background or certain, educational background that allows them to understand some of those complexities. And I mean, Bart, you were referring there to some of the durations of some of the applications that are caught in the system. But what do you think then are the challenges and the opportunities in terms of how we engage society in the planning process?
That's a really great question, and I'm not sure I've got the answer. I think as well as that issue about engaging people, it's engaging, I suppose, positivity. Because often we're very, very focused on planning applications, that's primarily what I do, as well as promotions and working sites through the plan process as well. But what I worry about with planning applications and that fundamental engagement, because the majority of people, their engagement with the planning application is when your neighbour puts in a conservatory or something like that. But when you think about bigger schemes and what the government's trying to deliver, I think the majority of people who engage are probably anti-development, and they have a loud voice. Generally, they are very quick to sort of generate groups, and they're often objectors are, they have time, they have resource, they're generally reasonably well educated, and able to engage politically to bring pressure on sort of decision makers, and that's something that we haven't touched on, but this government's talking about maybe removing planning committee from making decisions on certain types of sites, potentially allocated sites, etc. So I think the engagement of people who are objecting is important. It's absolutely important, and if they bring material issues forward, then yes, they should be considered. But I think what's often silent is the people who want development, or maybe don't want that particular development because it's not on their doorstep, but actually the things we've talked about, I mentioned before about affordable housing. Well, where are people going to live? Where are younger people going to be able to buy properties? Where are potentially families whose kids have luckily gone on to move out are able to sort of downsize into places they want to live, rather than stay in a 4 or 5 bed house, sort of bed blocking almost. There needs to be options, and I think people like that need to be engaged as well and heard. So yeah, in terms of plan making, I think that's even harder to get people engaging in. Development management side, the planning applications, people do that. They read notices and they get pretty heightened about it. People talk about it, but planning is a plan-led system. It's a plan-led process, and rightly so. I think it fundamentally works. It's better planning. I think the hardest thing to do is engage in plan making and in local plans coming forward. And I know there's sort of regional plans being talked about again. I'm not sure how people can engage in that. But in terms of the plan making, I think a really good example, when I was at Gateshead, they did a thing called King for the Day.
Right.
And that was to try and engage people in schools, to sort of say, well, if you were king for a day, what would you develop for Gateshead? And they talk about leisure opportunities and better access to community facilities and football and all sorts of things. It was excellent, really good. But whether or not it truly engaged, I don't know, because you can engage at quite a superficial level, and I think sometimes planning might do that. Is how do you truly engage so people really understand it and understand the implications of their decision making? But that's a broad challenge, I think, for local government. For government, how many people engage full stop. I think people often don't really get into the sort of weeds of things until it matters to them, which is maybe not absolutely true.
There's something here, I think, on storytelling. So we've done a lot of work in JBA to consider how we can convey what is often quite technical work that we do as engineers and scientists, using data and scientific evidence, and how we can relate that to the wider community, the wider society. And so we have done quite a lot of work over the last couple of years with artists and creatives, thinking about creative communication so that it becomes more relatable, rather than just doing engagement for engagement's sake. And I think there's something in that. I think there's something here, listening to you, Bart, there, actually, in terms of telling the story of planning and local planning processes, so that people can really understand it, rather than just putting something out for consultation. Iain, I'd like to bring you in here as well on this question, if I may, just around the same theme of engagement and how we can bring the whole of society into the planning process and the planning application piece, just so that society has a greater awareness of what's going on, what the pressures are in their local community. I don't know if you've got anything else to add that beyond what Bart's just been discussing.
Yes, thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think storytelling, that's a good one, because I think the planning industry and development industry have been really poor at storytelling and explaining the bigger picture to people about potentially why we need new development, sort of pressures of development and things. And a lot of concerns you hear from people is about infrastructure, about new homes, what pressure does that have on things like doctors, surgery, schools? But actually, a lot of local authorities and developers are set up to deal with that in terms of schemes I've been involved with, where the developers actually made contributions to the local school to enable that to be expanded, things like doctor surgeries as well. So but we don't tell that very often. It's not really well known about what they've done. So I think it's definitely improving the communication on that, to say, well, maybe this development's actually going to create X number of places at a new school, for instance. That's something that needs to be improved a lot. I guess again, making it more relatable as well to a sort of cross spectrum of people. So again, planning, it seems to be dominated by the same people, and it always asks the same questions, so you always get the same answers. So it's maybe taking it out to different demographics. So again, like younger people in schools, because a lot of planning is obviously planning for the future. So again, it's sort of younger people maybe asking them what they see the future as, what sort of things they want. I know in JBA, you mentioned we've got a lot of advanced technology, actually, where I was looking in the office, and we've actually got a virtual reality headset that you can put on and actually look around new proposals, which is brilliant. Rather than looking at two-dimensional plans again, which the planning system has these plans and PDF documents, which people really struggle to understand. But if you put like a VR headset on, and you can actually look around a new development and see what's proposed, I think things like that are become more common now, which is a really good thing. And again, we ask new developments about maybe people who live nearby, who already live there, which is obviously a necessary thing to do, but not necessarily looking at who's going to live in these homes. Well, have we heard from their views, people who don't have a home, who are maybe stuck living with their parents? So yeah, it's I think there's a lot
Mm.
to do, but I am encouraged with some of the steps that are being made.
That's really good. And
Yeah,
I think well, I was listening to the radio actually this morning, and Steve Reed, the DEFRA minister, was on the
yeah,
radio,
Yeah.
and he was being challenged on um, the potential conflict in the public's perception between the the growth in and you know, as you alluded to, Bart, speeding up the planning process, getting more developments through, and pressure to build on the floodplain, which is
mm,
often what people perceive. And clearly there is a bit of a conflict, a dilemma there. But he was right when he alluded to the fact that actually those are challenges that will be dealt with at a local level through local planning applications that people can engage with. So if
mm.
there are local concerns about you know, building on floodplains, then you know, people have got the opportunity to look at those proposals and get involved. We are, as we often are on the podcast, watching the time tick
Yeah,
away from us
it's,
very quickly. And look,
that's a shame, Phil, because I really wanted to come back and build on some of the really good points Ian made. But you know
yeah,
what? This could be part one. We could maybe do a sequel, like planning
I,
sequel on this one. But really interesting stuff, Ian.
It is, and do you know, Bart, we've had this conversation with a couple of guests that actually we're going to bring them back, and we're going to do a second
Mm,
or third follow up. And I'm really keen to do this because it feels like we are just starting to scratch the surface. And so I suppose
yeah.
in the last couple of minutes that we've got available, quick sort of headline bullet points from you both, just in terms of what you think some of um, the aspirations are for wider stakeholders in that planning process. So we spoke about the, you know, the wider society, but what are the sort of top headlines in terms of aspirations in terms of landowners or developers or planning officers, and I suppose that's in the context that um, ultimately, I think everybody involved in the planning process is trying to create developments that are sustainable and in which people want to live and work. But we've spoken a lot about what many of those challenges and hurdles are today. So I suppose, yeah, a final thought, a final bullet point headline from you both on what those aspirations are in the context of the current landscape. Maybe Bart, let's start with you.
No, thanks. Well, yeah, just breaking it down into those bullet points, I suppose. Planning officers are excellent. The majority of local authority planning officers are absolutely fantastic, hardworking, enough from the CPD, and understanding of planning is superior to some of the consultants I suspect that they deal with. Really, really good people and they're the right people to make decisions. And I think it is really important that they're resourced, and I think it's really important that the engagement process remains. And I think committee has a role in that. Maybe not for smaller schemes, but certainly for those
Mm,
major schemes and strategic developments, which are no doubt going to come forward. Landowners, all sorts of different things motivate landowners. I have different landowners who have all sorts of aspirations. They talk about legacy, which I touched on a little bit with the MP, who's not a landowner, but he's still a stakeholder.
yes.
I hear things that they want to, see things they can be proud of, and their family will drive past and see. Other landowners are probably looking for the best return they possibly can. And as I mentioned previous, sometimes housing isn't always the best return. Renewables, data centers, battery storage, infrastructure works have value now, genuine value. And I think that's something that's starting to develop. Also, landowners need to understand that values which previously, I had someone describe that they used to think they had a pot of gold, they've probably got a pot of silver, but they might actually just have a pot of brass, because part of the new changes which are coming through, which talk about the golden rules and the 50% addition on affordable housing standards, means that some sites, unfortunately, within the northeast and probably elsewhere, just are barely viable, and you're not going to get a willing out
Wow.
landowner to sell. So they're potentially going to hang on to their land and just carry on grazing cows,
Yeah.
and that's a barrier. So there's almost unintended consequences. That the thought is right, because we get that 15% uplift in housing, affordable housing, but actually it might make a site value so poor that the landowner will hang on for the next time there's a
Mm,
governmental change.
mm, mm.
Developers, it's just juggling everything we talked about. Uncertainty, landowners' uncertainty, which I've touched on there, because they consider the site's got a value and it might not quite be there. Changes the flood risk, BNG, which is still probably slightly unquantifiable. The credits for that vary in value or price, if we put it, almost seen as a tax, but it varies massively. And then there's the vagaries and lack of resource within planning departments, which can mean huge delays, decisions which aren't necessarily robust. There's a lot of great officers in there, but there's probably not enough really great officers, even though I think that they're fantastic and the right people to be making the decisions. And then you've just got the delays. If you have to go to appeal, it can be 6 to 12 months or longer. So there's a lot of uncertainty for all three sort of parts I've mentioned there. But I think it's getting it. If there's general growth and aspiration for growth, and a few of the shackles are lifted, there are benefits, but it may not be absolutely. It may not necessarily lead to the explosion in growth that potentially we need, or is we're considered to need. So yeah, that probably wasn't very bullet point, Phil, but yeah, I've tried to focus on the three main parts. Thanks.
It's because it's such a complex picture and story, and we will return to it. Iain, I think then the final closing words from you today, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the complexity in planning is greatly increased over the years now. Just, I guess, dealing with a more complex world. So obviously, climate change and climate resilience, so a big thing that sort of in decades past just weren't even considered, and it's so important now for planning, as well as related things. So biodiversity net gain, so the need to actually improve biodiversity as a result of development as well. So there's other things like building safety and fire risk as well, which sadly came out because of Grenfell. These are all things that have now been put on the planning system to deal with. At the same time that there's been a massive reduction in resourcing in planning, just the number of people in local government especially, which is it's sort of created this perfect storm. But hopefully there are positive signs of that'll improve, and resourcing will be improved as well. So I think it is a very challenging future, but sort of one that can be positively done.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think some of the topics that we've touched on today that relate to climate resilience around biodiversity net gain, the National Flood Risk Assessment, NAFA 2 that's coming out. Also, we touched on the engagement side of it as well. I'd like to come back to some of those topics. So make space in your diaries, chaps, because we will be coming back to do episode 2 on this in due course. It's been a great conversation. Thanks, Bart. Thanks, Iain. Really appreciated your expert insights and analysis. And so we have reached the end of our time today. As always, if you've enjoyed listening, then please hit the subscribe button so that you're ready for the next episode when it lands in a few weeks' time. Till then, thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Emonson, and you've been listening to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting.